The tape begins to play. Through the static and interference, you hear breathing, labored, desperate. Then a woman's voice, speaking Russian, her words trembling with the terrible knowledge that these will be her last. She's burning alive as her capsule tumbles through the atmosphere, out of control, her transmissions growing weaker, until finally, there is only silence. According to official Soviet records, this cosmonaut never existed. But the Giudica Cordiglia brothers, two Italian amateur radio operators with homemade equipment in a converted Italian hillside bunker, recorded every second of her death. This isn't a Cold War fantasy. This is the question that has haunted space historians for over 6 decades. How many cosmonauts did the Soviet Union send into the black void of space, only to erase their names from history when things went catastrophically wrong? The Soviets called their space program a triumph of communist ideology over Western imperialism. But behind the propaganda posters and orchestrated parades celebrating Yuri Gagarin as the first man in space, there may have been others. Others who went first. Others who never came back. Others whose families were told to forget they ever existed. The Soviet space program was born from desperation and national pride. After the devastation of World War II, Joseph Stalin demanded that his scientists produce something that would prove Soviet superiority to the entire world. The Germans had developed the V-2 rocket, and now both superpowers were scrambling to claim that technology for themselves. The Americans took Wernher von Braun. The Soviets took everyone else they could find, along with whatever rocket parts hadn't been destroyed or smuggled west. But Stalin wanted more than missiles. He wanted to conquer space itself, and he didn't particularly care how many lives it would cost. Under the leadership of the brilliant but haunted chief designer, Sergei Korolev, whose identity was kept secret even from his own cosmonauts, the Soviet program lurched forward with a speed that terrified the Americans and everyone working within the program itself. Korolev himself had survived Stalin's gulags, where his captors had beaten him so severely his jaw never properly healed. He knew what failure meant in the Soviet system. It meant disappearing. It meant your name being erased from photographs, from documents, from existence itself. The Soviets had been airbrushing people out of history long before they started launching them into space. The Giudica Cordiglia brothers were just teenagers when they became obsessed with the new frontier of space exploration. Achille and Giovanni Battista built their listening station in an old German bunker outside Turin, pointing their homemade antennas toward the heavens, scanning frequencies, searching for Soviet transmissions. The Soviets were notoriously secretive, often announcing their space missions only after they had already succeeded. The brothers wanted to hear the truth as it happened, unfiltered by propaganda. What they heard instead would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In November of 1960, before Yuri Gagarin's triumphant orbital flight that would make him a global celebrity, the brothers claimed to have intercepted transmissions from a Soviet spacecraft in distress. A man's voice, speaking rapidly in Russian, his breathing quickening, describing problems with his spacecraft. Then his voice began to fade as the signal grew weaker and weaker until it vanished entirely. The Soviets never acknowledged this mission. There was no parade, no announcement, just silence. The brothers recorded it all on their tape recorders, preserving what they believed was evidence of the first man to die in space. Then came May of 1961, just weeks after Gagarin's successful flight had electrified the world. The brothers intercepted another transmission. This time, it was a woman's voice. She was calm at first, professional, reporting technical data. Then something went wrong. Her capsule had malfunctioned during re-entry. She was coming in too fast, at the wrong angle. The temperature inside was rising. You can hear it in her voice as the recording progresses, the calm professionalism giving way to fear, then terror. She knew she was going to die. She described the heat. She described the capsule beginning to burn. And then, according to the brothers' recordings, she began to scream. The signal faded out as the capsule presumably disintegrated in the atmosphere, somewhere over the vast emptiness of the Soviet Union, where the wreckage would never be found or officially acknowledged. The Soviet Union did eventually send a woman into space. Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in orbit in June of 1963, and she returned safely to Earth as a hero of the Soviet Union. But was she really the first woman they sent up? Or just the first one who survived? Critics have spent decades trying to debunk the Giudica Cordiglia recordings. They point out that the brothers were not professional intelligence analysts. They suggest the recordings could have been elaborate hoaxes or misinterpreted training transmissions or propaganda exercises. The technical quality of the recordings makes definitive analysis nearly impossible, but the brothers never wavered in their claims. They insisted they had documented at least 9 different space disasters that the Soviets covered up, including missions where cosmonauts died from asphyxiation, capsule failures, and one particularly horrific incident where a cosmonaut's heart allegedly gave out during launch due to the extreme G-forces. What makes the Lost Cosmonaut theory more than just Cold War paranoia is that we know with absolute certainty that the Soviets did lie about their space program, repeatedly, systematically. They lied about failures, they lied about casualties, they even lied about their successes, altering details to make them more politically palatable. When Gagarin's capsule malfunctioned during re-entry and he had to eject and parachute separately to Earth, the Soviets simply omitted this detail from their official reports because it made the landing seem less triumphant. They erased cosmonauts from official group photographs when those cosmonauts fell out of political favor or were dismissed from the program for any reason whatsoever. Vladimir Ilyushin was the son of a famous Soviet aircraft designer. Rumors have persisted for decades that he was launched into orbit in April of 1961, days before Gagarin, but that his capsule malfunctioned and crash-landed in China. The Chinese, according to this theory, held him for a year before quietly returning him to Soviet custody. The official Soviet explanation is that Ilyushin was injured in a car accident around this time, but he was a cosmonaut in training. His name appeared on early lists. Then it didn't. He never flew in space, at least not officially. The thing about totalitarian regimes is that they create the perfect conditions for these kinds of conspiracies to flourish, because they have already demonstrated their willingness to manipulate truth itself. The Soviet Union didn't just hide embarrassing failures, they reconstructed reality. They turned cosmonauts who had been preparing for missions into unpersons when those cosmonauts questioned orders or showed insufficient loyalty. The first group of cosmonauts selected for training included 20 people. By the time Gagarin flew, several had already been dismissed from the program. Their faces were literally cut out of photographs. Their names disappeared from documents. If the state could do this to living cosmonauts who had simply been dismissed for political or medical reasons, what would they do to hide the deaths of cosmonauts who had perished in secret missions that were never supposed to be acknowledged in the first place? Valentin Bondarenko definitely existed. He was part of the original cosmonaut corps, training alongside Gagarin. In March of 1961, just weeks before Gagarin's historic flight, Bondarenko was completing a 15-day isolation experiment in a pressure chamber. The chamber was filled with pure oxygen to simulate space conditions. When Bondarenko removed his biomedical sensors, he carelessly tossed an alcohol-soaked cotton ball onto a hot plate. In the oxygen-rich environment, the chamber exploded into flames. Bondarenko burned for 8 hours before dying. The Soviets classified every detail of his death. They removed him from all official photographs. They told his family never to speak of it. The world didn't learn about Valentin Bondarenko until 1986, 25 years after his death, after Glasnost finally allowed some Soviet secrets to emerge into the light. If they could hide his death for a quarter century, even though he died on the ground, surrounded by witnesses and doctors, what else could they hide? The archives opened slowly after the Soviet Union collapsed. Some secrets spilled out. We learned about disasters that had been whispered about but never confirmed. But the archives are incomplete. Documents are missing. Entire files have disappeared. The men who knew the truth, the engineers and launch directors and KGB officers who supervised the cover-ups, they've mostly taken their secrets to their graves. The few who have spoken have often been vague, hinting at things they cannot or will not fully explain. There's a monument in Moscow now, at the Cosmonaut Training Center, honoring those who died in the Soviet space program. The names carved in stone include Bondarenko, who burned in the oxygen chamber. They include Vladimir Komarov, whose Soyuz 1 capsule crashed in 1967, his final words reportedly being curses at the engineers who sent him up in a spacecraft they all knew was not ready to fly. The monument includes the names of cosmonauts who died in training accidents, in aircraft crashes, from medical complications. But how many names are missing? How many cosmonauts are still airbrushed out of history, their deaths classified, their families sworn to silence? The Giudica Cordiglia brothers are old men now. They still have the tapes. They still maintain they recorded real cosmonauts dying in space. And sometimes, late at night, amateur radio operators scanning the old Soviet frequencies report hearing something strange. Echoes, fragments of old transmissions, voices speaking Russian, their words distorted by decades of electromagnetic interference, bouncing endlessly through the ionosphere. Ghost signals from ghost cosmonauts who never came home. The question that remains is not whether the Soviets were capable of such a cover-up. We know they were. The question is how many are still up there, their bodies drifting in the endless dark, orbiting a planet that has forgotten they ever existed.